sort of mentioned what you're trying to do in the books that you've most recently written. But I'd like to ask, so with all these aspects of Filipino womanhood that you talk about, agency, choices, in pushing the boundaries, what was important to you to portray in the books?
With the caricature of the biggest red flag of a person. And then naturally, as the character grows, I allow the character to organically grow in the narrative. They show that they do have green flags. And to me, that's important because it shows that we are equal and we're equally flawed and we're equally good. So that's...
Right, thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, so just to build also on what Mookie mentioned earlier, so my characters tend to have the agency and purpose, generally, but also as a Filipino woman especially, she's aware that she lives in a very collective society, and while she has agency and purpose, her choices tend to be considerate. Kasi, of course, we always have to think about our family, our parents, so each of the decisions we make generally takes into account that society.
Okay, go ahead.
I guess to go back to what I mentioned earlier, I really tried to give the central character in the book, Alice, who's my love, agency because so much was going on in her lifetime. So, when she was coming of age, Filipinas didn't have the right to vote yet. That was something we were still fighting for. Then the war happened, then the Japanese occupation, and then the liberation of Manila. So she went through all of these things, not really as a traditionally strong character. And I actually use that as a metaphor for the country. I tried through her to kind of say that we also had a voice. We went through changing times, but at the same time, we had our own agency. We survived it all. And basically, that was the most important way of, I found that I could empower something I love. And I mentioned this in a novel I really like writing because it was metaphorical and literal.
Thank you.
The There Are No Falling Stars is a book of nonfiction. So if you don't mind, I will talk about Sombra because that was a fictional book, the central character of which you are led to think is the boy, but he is not. And that's something I did on purpose, where the strongest characters in the book are the women. And at the end of the day, it is the women that sustain the entire narrative. And they are all strong and flawed in their own ways. But it was a strength that I wanted to reflect what was necessary to be the kind of woman in the society they occupy. Do you know what I mean? To be the kind of woman that they needed to be to survive the society they were in. So that was something I actually went into the book very conscious about. And so I wrote it specifically like that, where all of these women represented different strengths and different aspects of motherhood, being a wife, being an independent woman. None of them, you can say, was a victim, not even a victim of circumstance, because they took the circumstances they were handed and used it to further strengthen who they were, is what I wanted to do. Now, There Are No Falling Stars is really just, and the reason I felt like I wanted to put a book like this together was there weren't very many people like me when I was working in the international field. And by that, I mean people from the Philippines who were born and raised in Manila, who were covering international news all across the world. You know, there might have been a few Filipinos who were working in regional news, but like when I was in the Middle East, I was the only one. And in many places, people were shocked maybe that somebody from Manila was there with them. You know, or trying to tell such an international story. So I wanted to be able to let other people know what that was like for somebody from here, from this part of the world, going out there to tell more international things than it is. Because for maybe the first 5-10 years that I was doing it, I couldn't do it. And then I realized I was limiting myself by thinking that just because I was from Asia, I was not allowed to tell the story of, let's say, the Western countries. I covered Europe. The whole time you're feeling like a fraud you know, or you're feeling like, oh my gosh, at some point someone's going to tell me I don't have the right to do this. But we do, because if they can tell our stories, why can't we tell theirs? You know? And at the end of the day, stories are stories, and you bring to it everything you are, but you shouldn't be limited by it. In fact, everything that you think limits you makes you unique and gives you a very different perspective from which to attack any story you might be privy to or that you might witness. So I think it is a strength more than a disadvantage. And I've totally gone off.
But going tayo. Sorry. No, yeah. Actually, that's a very great tangent to go into our next question. No? Kasi like, you all talked about what you'd like to portray specifically, your stories, the novels that you wrote, and then of course, Marga, your own experiences as well. But something that I found interesting when going through your books, reading through your books, is how varied the experience of Filipino womanhood was depending on the time. So all of you wrote books set in different periods of history. So contemporary, the 2000s, all the way back also to World War II and the American and Japanese occupation even. So what would you say would be, what was important to you to portray Filipino womanhood during that time? And how would you compare it to your own experiences now as a Filipino woman? So maybe you feel like
I'd like to think that women during my grandmother's time, they believed our freedoms, the freedoms that we're enjoying now. I have a great-grandmother actually who was a suffragette who fought for the women's right to vote. And I think you were granted that in 1936. So I think without those stories, without the things that they fought for, I don't know if we'd be sitting here today. I mean, the hope is that yes, definitely, but when I think about the characters I was writing in that book, because I do write about the two of them, my great-grandmother's in the book, my grandmother is also in the book. When I look at them, I really wanted to show how even during those times, women in our society were also empowered already, right? They were taking us there already. And I think those stories that are sometimes unwritten and hidden in history book, hidden from history books, should be told. When I wrote Assembly Canas, people were like, you know, that was Mica De Leon. During that period, those were also her experiences. So I'm sure all of us have had similar experiences with the women in our lives during that time. And it's just fascinating. I think those stories also should be heard.
okay.
So my novels tend to be contemporary. So my characters then deal with contemporary issues. They grapple with work-life balance. So there's a big issue for, I guess, increasingly for more women. So more and more of us are becoming, productive members of the society, and we have responsibilities outside the house as well. So those are the challenges that we face. I also talk about power balance in marriages because, sometimes with women working, they still have these responsibilities at home. So one of these, stories I remember is about the CEO of Pepsi in Germany. She's quite popular as a CEO. And basically, even as she made those power decisions at the office as a CEO of a global brand, she still goes home and thinks about, does my daughter still have milk? Does my baby still have diapers? So there's that mental load that women still carry. And I guess those are the issues that I try to consider in my writing.
Mix, just to jump off of that, I actually have a question related to that. I have a question now for Mica. So Mix has specifically talked about the experiences of being a mother. So these are things that are, you could be the most powerful woman in the boardroom and whatsoever, and sometimes you still come home and you still have to think about motherly things. So what would you say now in comparison was important for you to portray in your novel, since your novel features a single career woman?
I guess I write adult contemporary romance. So when this question was raised, given to us earlier, I thought I had the easiest one because I'm writing now. I'm writing all my experience, but no. The hard part was because I write romance. Romance basically promises a happy ending, no matter what. Could be only word, that's a baby. Could be that kind of storytelling. Could be Wattpad, soap opera. Could be that. But the promise is that happy ending. But because it's contemporary, romance heavily in our storytelling. So, I think I went offline with your question.
Actually, not. All right, the pandemic.
I have going on script.
Kasi, I mean, no one's going to deny that the pandemic greatly affected every aspect of society, di ba? Even it affected whether or not you're a family woman or a single career woman. It definitely affected your life. So, what was important to you to portray your female characters, your characters who are pursuing their careers and they don't have families yet? What was important to get across to your readers?
Still, I think my message for all of my books right now that I want to push forward is that a woman has to know that she's equal. Everyone is equal, and no matter what, because this isn't a patriarchal society. No matter what there are men who are gonna think that I'm the man. I'll be the one in command of my household. But no, what I want women to know is that in my romance is that in a partnership, in a relationship, there's always you have to see each other as partners and not as someone who has to be taken care of. So that's what's important to me. Did we all hear that, everyone? Partners, equal partners.
Alright, thank you so much. Actually, I'd like to ask the questions a little bit now, the genre. So I know Mica's the only one who really wrote a romance novel amongst the four of you. But I'd like to get your thoughts on it. I mean, it is Women's Month, and women tend to love romance. So I'd like to get your thoughts on it, on what you think of romance, the role of romance as a genre in a female reader's experience. Or if you have no thoughts about romance as a genre, the genre you write. What is the importance or the role of that genre in a female reader's experience? So maybe we can start off with Mica for romance specifically, and then the genres that the three of you write in.
Practice the questions. So with romance I think of the genres, because I write in other genres as well. Romance I think is the one that faces the way society sees a woman's place in the world. So you have Jane Austen, that the only power that she has is to get married so that she could survive in the world. And then you go into the World War II where women have to go into the workforce. So what the guy
You all speak Tagalog, man, yes?
were allowed and actually were encouraged to join the workforce, and they're earning their own money, so they have their power now. So by the time right now the issue isn't really a woman isn't where her place is, but really how the dynamics of the relationship work. So romance to me as a genre is important because it's the one that places women's place. It's the one that places women's power as the generations go by. So I think that's why I think romance is such an important genre for women. And not just for women, just people who want to be in a relationship. Yeah.
Thank you, Mica. Alright, so what about you? It's the role of the genre that you write in contemporary. It's more of a coming of age novel, right? So what do you think is that contribution talaga to the female reader's experience?
Yeah, so I write literary fiction and contemporary. So basically, I try to make my characters more reflective. So they're not really, perfect. So I portray them realistically. They have their faults. They're not flawless. I mean, human being like I am. So basically, they have their faults, but the reflection makes them realize about this. And also, they face conflicts that I try to also resolve during the story. So sometimes there's redemption, but if it calls for it, there's redemption. But sometimes it's a realization per se is a big deal already for the characters.
Alright, thank you.
I don't really believe in genres. I think they're a construct. But like my book has been classified 3 different ways. I call it a biofiction because there are elements of historicity in them, but at the same time, time, I use fictional aspects to weave episodes in the characters' life together. So I think genre, the idea of genres, that's just a construct. That's just so we know where to find our books in bookstores. YA is here. Romance is here.
Yeah.
So, I believe in romance. My book is essentially a love story. There's love triangles everywhere, and I didn't need to make them because they really happened in my Lola's life. And yeah, it was the love of somebody that made her survive. Somebody saved her from certain death. She married after. I won't spoil it. But just buy the book and I read about.
Great segue.
The love triangles there. So. Wala ko yan, pinalagyan ng sense. But you know what I mean. And I remember when I was writing this, the deadline was looming. So I was kind of feeling really pressured. You know, you want to create a great ending that's not manufactured, that's really just organic. So I was thinking, really spreading it. I have to come up with a great ending, really soon. So like, what can I do to relax? And that's when I entered the world of K-dramas. So I was watching Crash Landing with You, the military drama, the very, very, actually such an ornate plot. If you haven't watched it yet, it's not just K-drama, there's a lot of stuff there, political stuff there. And then I remember writing a chapter in the, if I go off script, I remember writing a chapter in the book. I didn't plan for it to be that way, but it was like a big cliffhanger. And then they said, our proofreader was like, reading it, said, did you really need for this to happen? Because in this chapter, like one character has two people, she likes somebody, but that somebody likes somebody else. And then I ended with who this person that they both like is going to end up with, but I don't end it in that chapter. Or read on to the next chapter. I realized, that's Crash Landing in You. So those things were really their way into my consciousness while I was writing a quote-unquote serious book. That's not there. I know I'm not Filipino, and that's what
Please go. Alright. Marga, please share your thoughts on, well, your
But I agree with Mookie in that, you know, genre, it's very, I don't sit down and plan to write a particular genre. It just kind of comes out that way. So there's romance in the book too, you know. I mean, I have all sorts of romance, very different kinds of romance in the book. And the whole book in itself is like a love story to the Philippines, whether you see it that way or not. But that's what it was intended to be. Whether it ended well or not, by the book. but I think most, if not all stories are in some way a romance story because it's all relational. Everything we write is about human relationships. Whether it might be a love story between two people who are looking towards a committed long-term partnership, or siblings who are, you know, trying to figure out how to deal with a reality that they were not raised to deal with, or whether, you know, there's all sorts of things, but everything is about a person's relationship with something else or someone else. So in many different ways and in all sorts of definitions, you can say everything you do has some element of romance. Because part and parcel of that, aside from the relationship, is an element of hope. With everything, we all hope for that happy ending, no matter what it might be. And we're all still waiting to see if we get it or not. Because you might get a happy ending now, but it's still not over. It carries on, it carries on, it carries on. Yeah.
Actually, I'd like to sort of turn, you mentioned relationships, you know, and something that always comes up when we're talking about female characters is their relationships with other women in the narrative. You know, we always, sometimes you have a love interest, but also sometimes you have these female characters' friends, their siblings, etc. So I'd like to ask, I guess we could start with Marga and then go all the way to Mica. What did you want to portray when you're with your female characters related to other women in your books? Was it important to you to show those relationships? And if it was, what exactly did you want to show regarding women's relationships with each other?
Yes, I mean, for me, one of the strongest and the most powerful relationships in House of God is always among the sisters. And I wanted each of the sisters to be very distinct from each other. You had the oldest girl, then you had the middle girl, and then you had the youngest girl. And she was playing that concept of the tres Marias, you know, that we all have. So and I wanted them to be kind of born in very distinct distinct decades. So you have the one that was in the 60s, very different type of woman, to the one who was in the 70s. You know, they were all very distinct and different. And at the same time, they're all in the same household with the one mother who raises them all. So that was something I also, yes, I did that very consciously. Because even in their pursuit or decision of who to then marry, it was very informed by the decade they were born in, what place in the mother's life they were born in, you know, and what their status in the family was, which I think affects everybody. And so that was very important for me, and I very consciously tried to do that.
Alright, thank you, Mookie.
I think in certain chapters of the book, like in the beginning chapters, what was clear was the relationship between women and their mother figures. I think those were the ones that were really educational for my grandmother when she was growing up. And then during the Japanese occupation, I think in this book anyway, that's when she became a true ally of her contemporaries, and they became her allies as well because they were part of the resistance movement. Talking about normal, like middle-class women like my grandmother who entered into really moves. She was part of the resistance movement very secretly in ways that were very, very quiet, like so many of her contemporaries. So I feel like that was the era, that was the time where women were helping out other women, contemporary women. So whether they were smuggling love notes to prisoners of war in USP, right, from their amigas, or whether they were bringing food to their men in the camp, they were helping each other out in these small movements, these very tiny acts. So yeah, there. So for matriarchal, it became more of, okay, I will support you as a sister.
Alright, thank you. Migs, I know this is something that your book really deeply touches on because your novel is about 4 women who were roommates in college.
Yeah, so Room 216 is actually about 4 roommates. So it talks about friendship among these roommates and the type of friendship that spans time as well as distance. So it starts in university, and over time, each of them led separate lives from each other, but you know, in crucial moments, they drop in. So it talks about the importance of friendship. So of course, we also have our relationship with our parents, mothers, sisters, but also it's important to have a strong relationship with friends because, you know, most of the time, especially through friendship, they're there with you in both the highs and lows of life. And they can only enrich your life because, you know, with more friends, you have more experiences and you gain more support at every stage of your life.
Alright, thank you, Migs. And last but not least, Mica.
Well, my favorite character in my book is January, the best friend. I love Wicked, if you know Elphaba and Belinda, and that's one of my favorite tropes with female friendships, the grumpy and the sunshine. And with, yeah, and I see a book like that, I want it. I want to read it. So that is what I wanted to portray with Emma and January's relationship to each other. And I want January to be a good friend to Emma, the kind who would push her when she needs to be pushed forward for her own good, and the kind who would call her out for her own, I'm sorry, I'm about to curse, for her bullshit. So that was important to me. So I think in that kind of relationship with your female friendships, you want someone who will push you, and you want someone who would just call you out if you're about to do something stupid, like get drunk in the middle of the night and go out. Yeah. So, yeah.
Love it. So everyone's books really features, I don't know, a girl's girl, as the kids say, a girl's girl. Ayan. So thank you so much. I'd like to sort of, well, not wrap up because we have a couple more questions to go, but like I'd like to cap off your discussions of your books with what lesson or key message would you like readers reading your books to take away from the experience of going through what you've written. So let's start with Mica and then let's go this way.
The book, I keep mentioning this, but an important thing for me is equality because I think with some women, or like a lot of us, it's hardwired into us that we're women and therefore we're women, whatever that implies in this patriarchal society. And what I would like, and it's not like when I wrote it, I wanted you guys to learn this lesson from me, but I guess it came out naturally when I was writing it. I want, I guess, readers to know that you are someone's equal. Everyone's equal to each other. So that's important. Just embody that.
All right, next.
Yeah, so I go back to what I mentioned earlier about power over ourselves. So it's important for me and my readers as well to at least be inspired by that. But in this time and age, we can make choices. And thanks to Mookie's Lola, it's easier for us to make choices nowadays, right? Because of all the empowerment that we got from the earlier generation. So yeah, it's the power over ourselves and make the right choices. And also make these choices available to other women as well.
Thank you, Mookie.
I didn't have any kind of grand plan. When I was writing it, like I didn't want to, be on the pulpit and say, let's do this, girls. But I thought that in writing the portrait of a very strong woman, it's in those small stories we're educated about the people who came before us and what they can teach us by living the lives they led. So I tried to, I guess, just write a portrait of a strong woman who could survive anything. And you take from that what you will as a woman. Maybe you'll follow her example, but it's up to you because we have agency, right? We can choose what to do with our lives. We can choose whose examples to listen. So for me, it was just telling the story of a very strong and brave woman who was my own personal example.
Thank you. And last but not least, Marga.
Like Mookie, I didn't have a grand plan in terms of like, I'm doing this to teach a lesson. What I wanted to do was just paint a portrait of a world that I witnessed, not just having grown up here, but also in the work that we did where we had access to politicians, the government, and all of these other aspects of Philippine society that we might not normally be aware of, but are there. They pulsate underneath the surface, and they very much are part of why the country is the way it is. So I wasn't wanting to lead to a happy ending or to teach a lesson, but just hold up a mirror and then for any reader, not just the women, but for anybody who picks up the book, to maybe either find a piece of themselves in it or a piece of something they know, whether you like it or not. And I have had readers come up to me and like several readers have said that by the time they got to the end of the book, they like cast it across the wall. You know what I mean? Like, and for me, if you have that powerful a response to it, even if you hated it, that's still a response, and that's exactly the only thing any author I think can hope to accomplish, is for the book to resonate so much with you that it stirred something inside. Which is not to say that we might have started out wanting to do that, but that's what I relate to you, and hopefully you relate to the work that we create.
Alright, wow. So, I know everyone was emphasizing that they didn't really have like a grand plan, but I don't know about you, but I feel ready to like start a revolution right now. I feel so inspired. But yeah, so that's actually it for our panel for today. So everyone, please let's give Marga, Mookie, and Migs a round of applause for this very loud discussion. But before we end, actually, we will be spending some time for a question and answer portion. So if you'd like to ask our authors a question, the Fully Booked staff are passing around paper slips that you can write your questions on. Please feel free to reach out. Or if you would like to... Yeah, if anyone... Oh, okay. Alright, so while the Fully Booked staff are going around to ask if anyone else has other questions, we actually have 2 questions that have already been asked. Alright, so the first one is for Marga. How do you write the really terrible, gut-wrenching scenes in your book? So I'm so sorry, whoever this is, your handwriting is quite difficult to understand. No, I'm kidding.
It's terrible and gut-wrenching.
I got that part, the terrible and gut-wrenching. It made you wonder whether humanity still exists. So that was the question. And then there's a question for all authors. Describe your ideal female character. So let's start with Marga, and then we'll have the question for all authors.
Some of the scenes, they were quite difficult to write. Like even when I once the book got published, I have not reread it. I kind of let it go for fear of finding typos, among other things. But it's like, okay, it's done and it's yours now, that kind of thing. But it's also because a lot of the scenes are very difficult to read, and I get that. Many of them came out that way. It's like I had an idea of what had to happen. I didn't plot it out. I tend to write and let the words take me. And then I sometimes feel like I'm taking dictation. So it's like I'm in the scene, I'm watching it, and I'm describing it as best as I can, as I see it. And that's why when the scenes are more raw, if you will, you'll find there are less sentences. A lot of it is just words or phrases or even just an emotion. I'm just striking you with emotion. This action, this action, this action. Because many times when we are going through something so terrible, you're not even thinking in sentences. You're not even thinking in words. So that's kind of what I also wanted to reflect. Because more often than not, you are only able to digest whatever you might have been through after the fact. And so like in some sections, there are such horrible things that happen that there aren't even words. So you don't even know what happened until much later when somebody else is talking about it. So yeah, and they were hard. And some of the scenes I literally had to kind of push back and pause afterwards and not look at it for a while. And there were some scenes where I was like, should I maybe not put this in? And there was one scene in particular that, I had a few beta readers who were like, I don't think you want to leave this in. You don't want to leave this scene in. And I gave it to the Penguin editor, and I was worried because, and she said, give me more. Give me more. This needs to be more. And so I added a little bit more. After that, I was like, oh no, we can't look at this anymore. But it elicited even for me the response you kind of want, which is this is just awful. And again, I'm not saying it's true. It's not a factual book, right? But the way it makes you feel, I wanted that to be true. So, yeah.
All right, so the next question to that was the ideal female character. So go ahead, you can start with Migs and then Mica.
Yeah. So in my books, I try to portray my female characters as realistic as possible. So they're not always perfect. They have some flaws. But what I try to do is they try to overcome the challenges because of the agency, whatever challenges come their way. We try to overcome that and try to address conflicts and basically there should be a resolution. Not good all the time, but at least something happened because of the choices that they made.
All right, thank you, Migs. Mica?
Well, I'm fascinated by red flag characters. When I start a story, I plan out everything. I'm a hardcore outliner, but with characters, I leave them alone. I start as caricatures with the biggest red flag ribbon I could think of. And this is ideal for me as author and not ideal as a woman person. So, because they're the most fun to write, because they're the characters who have a more visible character development growth or downfall, whichever you want to go with, whichever direction you want to go. But yeah, an ideal character, female character for me as an author and not as a person, is someone who is deeply flawed enough that there's room for them to grow if I start writing about them.
In Women's Month, we support not just women's rights, but women's wrongs.
You speak about this one novel because I'm a poet. So I just wanted to try a new genre. I was really deeply in love with my grandma's story. So I knew eventually I would write about it. But even the language I told is lyrical and poetic. So even that kind of, my background really just lead into it. But I guess, my grandma was born during extraordinary times. These are not, we can also live in charged times and interesting times, but I wouldn't say there's extraordinary as my grandmother's times. So this is what a normal woman did during extraordinary times. She's granted agency, she had control over her life, or at least that's what I tried to do, or I tried to give her. But I like to think, we also have our own agency, we have our moments, even during quieter times, right? Less historically wrecking times. So whatever strength I gave her, whatever strength she possessed, and I could think we do too. And that even in the small decisions we make in our lives, we bring that agency and that agency and empowerment to our small decisions. But you know, in my poetry, the person has absolutely no agency, just makes things. So I'm glad I wrote this put a little structure in my life.
Okay, thank you so much. Marga, sorry, what was the question? Well, what is your ideal female character?
Okay. There's a character in Sombra that I really love. And again, a lot of the responses that I've gotten is, how can you write such unlikable characters? And I'm like, I love them. I did. I mean, the more unlikable they might seem, the more complex they are, the more fun for the author to write them. You know, and at the end of the day, I think, I can't say I hate any of them because they're all doing it for whatever reason they might firmly believe it. Nobody ever does something because they think it's the wrong thing to do. You know, they're all working by their own moral compass or their own definition of what should be done. So I can't say that any of them are better than the other, but I did have a favorite character to write. I won't tell you who, but I just thought she was so complex in her silences that I wanted to write that. I wanted to capture, there was a certain elegance to everything this one character had been through and how she dealt with it. And that's what I wanted to reflect. She was just so strong and in many ways so silent. And I think it's part of that being of a certain generation. You know, so yeah, for me it's that. It's more the quieter women that I find more interesting.
Yeah, of course.
Actually, I had the bitchy characters in my book were my favorite characters. You right in the school that I had but the bitchy characters were my favorite characters were such strong women, strong matriarchs. They were actual women that I've heard about. And when I had a reader read it, they said, you know, this is like the best character in the book. And it was actually not my grandmother, but my great-grandmother. Very volatile, very almost mean, but very fun to write. I was having such a ball and I had to like kind of tone it down because it was becoming more about her than about my grandmother. Typical, right? Typical. So I think it's the strong, nuanced, textured women that are also, you know, not just fun to write about it, but that we actually remember if we look at our own history.
Like I said, women's wrongs, not just women's rights. Yeah, of course. Wow, this is becoming a very...
You mentioned that you all like older characters and then their readers are like, they're not.
Yeah, they're not likable.
Mine is the other way around. I'm not a fan of some of my characters. So because I started with them being red flag characters, and then the readers, they message me, they tell me that they're so relatable, they're green flags, and like, so I guess the experience is so different.
Alright. So we have another question from the audience. So what is